Most youth ministry podcasts are made by youth leaders and used to share their ideas on how to engage with the next generation of youth ministry.
But here at the Mountain Sky Conference of the United Methodist Church, we're going straight to young people themselves to find out what they want from the church.
Like the prophets of the Bible, it is our hope that the voices of our young people will help inspire the church to better adapt to serve the now generation.
This is Mountain Sky Prophets.
Welcome, I'm Amanda Daniel.
And I'm Court Von Linder.
And you're listening to Mountain Sky Prophets.
And today on Mountain Sky Prophets, we are welcoming my new friend, I think Amanda's old friend, Isaac. Isaac, do you want to introduce yourself to our listeners?
Yeah, hi, my name is Isaac Strauss. I'm a junior at Fort Morgan High School. I attend the Fort Morgan United Methodist Church. A little bit about myself. Both of my parents are pastors, so I've grown up in the church. I serve on the Mountain Sky Conference delegation. I'm a jurisdictional delegate. I also serve on the Committee on Church Vitality. At the district level, I serve on the district leadership team, and I have a few different leadership positions in my church. Outside of church, I'm active in my FFA chapter, Future Farmers of America, in 4-H. And other than that, I just spend a lot of time with my friends and family.
Well, I'd like to hear a little bit more about what's it like having both of your parents as pastors?
Yeah, it's certainly interesting. They're traveling a lot between the different churches and stuff. So most of the week I'm here by myself at the house, but it's pretty nice to being able to have them have a flexible schedule. It's nice to be able to have them support me in my activities and stuff. Sometimes it's a little hard with them serving 3 different churches, finding a home kind of with the church. But I found my home in Fort Morgan, United Methodist Church. But yeah, it's certainly interesting, and I wouldn't change it. I really like it, actually.
I think you're the second interviewee we've had with parents as pastors. I think Sheridan, one of our other interviewees, her mom is also a pastor, but only serving one church. And Isaac, I'm curious to hear a little bit more about Fort Morgan, both the church that you belong to and then the area that you live in. Do you want to tell us a little bit about size of the congregation, more about the town where you're at, what that looks like?
Yeah, so the Fort Morgan United Methodist Church, pre-COVID, we usually average around 140. Now we're averaging around 50 or 60 in worship. So it's a mid-sized congregation, a lot of youth and young kids. Thankfully, in our church, we do a lot of mission work and stuff in our community. Fort Morgan as a town, it's around 15,000 people or so. It's very culturally diverse. And you wouldn't expect that out on the Eastern Plains, about an hour and a half east of Denver. But a surprisingly diverse place, agricultural based. It's just a really tight-knit community, and yeah, a great place to live.
And before you were in Fort Morgan, where were y'all?
So before Fort Morgan, I lived in Holyoke, which is even further out on the Eastern Plains, for 7 years or so. Then before then, we lived in the Southeast Colorado, so opposite side of the state.
And you said Fort Morgan is like an agricultural kind of area, town and whatnot. And you also mentioned that you're part of 4-H and FFA. What got you into 4-H and FFA? How'd you get there?
Well, it's kind of been a part of my whole life, growing up in rural areas my entire life. I always say that one of my biggest inspirations is my grandpa, and he was born and raised on a dairy. And whenever I'd go over to my grandparents' house, I'd always hang out in his office with him. And he would always show me all of his toy tractors, tell me all about life on the dairy. And other than that, later in life, he was a home builder. So he gave me this huge passion for homes and stuff like that. But with the agricultural part, it just really got me interested in the idea of living on a dairy, and just kind of taught me a love for agriculture. But I've also always had a love for horses. So that's how I would say it started. I started taking horse lessons for a few years, and then my instructor talked me into joining 4-H. And from there, I've just met friends who have encouraged me and taught me to go on further. So yeah, now I'm the president of my 4-H club. I've held a few officer positions in my FFA chapter, excuse me. So yeah, it's just really been a whole part of my life.
Right, and you serve in a lot of leadership roles, it sounds like, in your other activities, but also in the church. Is there a reason that you felt called to leadership?
Yeah, I think really it was just pushing myself outside of my comfort zone. When I was younger, I was painfully shy, and like I was always my mom's shadow. I'd always be hiding behind her wherever we went. And once I got into 4-H anyways, I was kind of pushed into a few small leadership positions, nothing too big at all. But then I went to a 4-H conference where all the state officers ran, and I was like, I want to be a state officer one day. And that's not going to happen anymore. But it really pushed me into thinking about holding other leadership positions. So I started my leadership positions in 4-H and FFA, 4-H at first. And I became the treasurer for a few years and just really enjoyed it. And so the prior youth director, the Mountain Sky youth director, told me that I should run to be a delegate, because our conference has a history of electing youth members. So I thought I'd give that a go. And from there, it just gave me a lot of opportunities to have leadership positions within the church. And then as I got into high school, I took on leadership positions in FFA.
And you said you serve as a jurisdictional delegate, is that correct?
Yeah, I serve as a jurisdictional delegate.
Can you tell us a little bit, what is that experience like? And what do you do exactly?
Yeah, honestly, I think being a jurisdictional delegate is probably one of my favorite things about church right now. And it has been for the past few years. Most of what we do are meetings right now anyways, until the jurisdictional conference, where we'll elect bishops and talk business that deals with our jurisdiction, the Western jurisdiction. But why I like it so much is we get to go on a lot of trips. I think I know all of us went to Kansas City last year, and we met up as a group. That wasn't directly with the jurisdiction, but kind of got me into there because of that. And then we had a conference in LA for also something unrelated. You didn't have to be a delegate to go, but most of the delegates got invited. And it's just a great group of people who you get to know, and get to meet a lot of people. And I just really enjoy it.
Are there a lot of other young people, or are you one of the only ones?
As of right now, anyways, I'm the only youth delegate in the Western jurisdiction. However, by the time jurisdictional conference comes, I won't be a youth delegate anymore, so there won't be any youth. But when I was elected, I was youth. Yeah.
What is that like, being essentially the only youth delegate in the Western jurisdiction?
It's a scary idea, walking into rooms with all these people who have tons and tons of experience and knowledge about the church, but it's a learning process. The more meetings I go to and the more things I learn about, the more knowledge I have and the more input I'm able to put in. So my confidence raises the more it goes on. But at first, walking into like the first delegation meeting, it was definitely scary. But yeah, like I said, the more it goes on, the more confidence I get to voice my ideas and my opinions and stuff. And also the delegation is great on connecting with us and meeting me and really encouraging me to lift up my voice.
I'm glad to hear that, they're encouraging you to continue to use your voice, because I believe that young people's voices matter in the church. Amanda and I talk about this all the time, and I got this from Amanda where, y'all's generation isn't the next generation. You're the now generation. You are a part of the church. You belong to these congregations. You're members in some capacity, whether that's, just going to youth group, whether it's being involved with committees and all other sorts of leadership opportunities, even just being involved in worship, mission work, as you mentioned earlier on. And so when churches and even delegations at conference and jurisdictional levels encourage your voice and other young people's voices to be heard and to be spoken, I think, that's just great to hear. And I'm glad that they encourage it, because we need you, honestly.
Yeah, I agree. I was going to ask, why do you think that there's not very many youth that serve on that level? And this question is twofold. What would you say to youth out there to encourage them to get involved?
Yeah, I think part of the reason why people my age and even younger don't hold leadership positions or become very active at a higher level is because they don't know that you can be active. Looking at your local church, even just looking at the committees, the trustees, the SPR, whichever committee it is at your church, it's always the parents, the adults that are running it, and any member can be a part of those committees. So I think most of it is that they don't know that you can be a part of that. But in reality, the adults would love to have more youth on committees and voice their opinions. So what I would tell youth in our conference is that you can do it. You can be active in the conference. You can hold leadership positions. You can be on committees. You can be a very active and helpful person to our conference.
Isaac, I think you touched on this a little bit in talking about serving on the jurisdictional delegation. But you talked about this a little bit where, it can be intimidating being the only young person in the room and making these decisions and, again, voicing your opinion and things like that. Yeah, what would you say are the other challenges of serving in leadership roles in church communities, both at the local church level and the conference and jurisdictional level?
Yeah, part of the hardest part for me anyways is that church work is slow. There's a lot of talk and it takes a long time to make a decision. And by the time a decision is made and is acted on, it feels like it's been so long since the conversation first brought up. So that's part of the biggest struggles I have, is just being patient. And I think being like an ambitious youth member, I want to change everything and like right away and make all this change. But in reality, change takes time. And so that's probably one of the biggest struggles. Another struggle anyways for me is I get churched out just with the different meetings I have. I think I had like a whole Saturday worth of meetings for like 3 or 4 weeks in a row. And Saturdays are my day off because I'm a student. So that was a challenge for me, is to be motivated to keep going to those meetings and staying involved and stuff. So yeah, I would say my 2 biggest struggles anyways are staying motivated and encouraged to be active in the duties that I hold, as well as being patient and realizing that real change takes time and that I need to be patient.
That's a good reminder. I like that you said church work is slow because I agree. It's definitely a lesson in patience, for sure.
It absolutely is. And I'm curious too, Isaac, as a follow-up on that, why do you think church work is as slow as it is?
I think it's as slow as it is because the people who are at the decision table with me have been in ministry for 30 plus years, and they're used to the way things have always been. So I think they're afraid to make big changes. And so they have to take that time to think through everything and kind of convince themselves that yeah, this change might be a good idea. I think that the people at the decision table just are so used to what has been that they're a little scared to move on to the future.
We hear that a lot, don't we, Court, on the podcast? The saying, you know, that's not how we do it, and that's hard for folks sometimes. But I wonder too if, you know, as a church, we strive to be inclusive and we want to listen to all voices, and that takes time to be, you know, patient to hear what everybody thinks. And sometimes I'm one of those people that just wants to go in and go, okay, we're going to do this, let's go.
Absolutely. I think there's a lot of value, obviously, in listening to the stakeholders, right? Like when we're doing church work together, the stakeholders are the members, they're the community that we're serving, whatever that may be, whether that's in mission or within the church walls as well. And so in order to make sure that we're keeping in like with their interest, right? Because I always think of like not wanting to do work for others. I want to do it with others. That involves building relationships and having those conversations, which does, take a lot of time. And then with that too, like you said, Isaac, I think it is scary for folks to go through change, to try something new and different. And I know this as like a youngish person in the church, as like a youth pastor and things like that, when you come in with like new ideas and older congregations, they're always a little bit hesitant to move forward and shake it up a bit, because who isn't, right? Like it's always intimidating to do something that you've never done before and not know how it's going to turn out, which when I think of scripture and a lot of stuff, stories in the Bible, I feel like that's a common thread too, is that they never really know how it's going to turn out, but the constant there is having faith and doing it anyway. So I'm curious then with that, what would you say to folks in the conference who might be struggling to go through change or to try something new and different?
I would say that change is the only way to move forward. I think the sooner they realize that as time goes on, you have to make change to survive. I think the sooner people realize it, the more easier it'll be and more comfortable they'll be with. Also thinking what do they have to lose almost. I'm trying to think of, like, in my different leadership positions, there's plenty of change that we have to go through. And I'm trying to think of kind of what's going through my head, but I don't think much goes through my head. Maybe that's what people need to realize, is that don't think just you, kind of. I don't know. I don't really struggle with making change, so that's a hard question to know what to tell people.
That's a good question. I'm right now, I'm good with change. I don't have a hard time with it. We'll see years from now. Do you think, Isaac, because the change is so slow going, and we tend to have that attitude a lot of times, that that's not how we do it here, do you think that keeps young people away from church?
I think it might discourage younger members from trying to make change in their church, holding leadership positions. I don't know if it really scares them away from being just a everyday member, kind of. But certainly if you're thinking about, I would love to do this differently in our church, but see that change takes years. Just looking at like General Conference 2019 was when they made the decision, and then the next one won't be till next year, so 3 years. Change takes a long time, so I think it would certainly discourage younger members from voicing their opinions to make change and wanting to do something new and different. Because I know I would be discouraged if I saw that if I wanted to change something, it would take months, maybe even years, But I don't know if it would necessarily discourage people from the church. I don't know.
So Isaac, you're obviously super involved with conference work and church leadership and things like that. And I know both of your pastors, or both of your parents are pastors. There we go. And I'm sure that might have played some influence in this. But why why do you find yourself in these leadership positions? What brings you there? And you might have touched on this earlier, so I'm sorry if I'm bringing it back up again. But yeah, why are you so involved? What inspires you to be so involved in the church?
Yeah, just my entire life, I've always been focused on the future, and that's sometimes a bad thing because I don't take the present for what it is. I always am looking towards the future. So I think that's part of the reason why I've always been interested in being at the decision table, is because I'm so focused on the future that I want to have a say in what the future looks like. I think one of the reasons why I continually am invited to the decision-making table is because I'm able to voice my opinions and I'm not just there to make everyone else happy. I think I'm not afraid to stand up and say what my opinion is, even if that's my opinion and no one else's. So I think that's kind of why I keep being invited. But yeah, for the most part, I would say it's just that I'm always future driven and am wanting to have a say in what the future of our church looks like.
Thinking about the future, then I like this question that we ask I think we try to ask it with every one of our interviewees, but what do you think is the biggest challenge facing your generation?
I think the biggest challenge facing our generation, my generation right now anyways, is that everyone is so individual and independent. I think everyone has the mentality of, if it's not hurting me, then it's fine. If it's good for me, then let's do it. I think that would be one of the biggest challenges, is that everyone is just looking out for themselves instead of looking out for others and a group as a whole. And so I think that with that mindset, it's creating more division in our country. I've heard people talk about that on this podcast earlier. It's just, I think that, yeah, everyone just is independent, and I'm trying to think of a better word for that, but I think the listeners will understand what I'm trying to say.
Where do you think that individual, independent, looking out for myself mindset comes from?
I think it's a cycle. I think people just, like, one generation will think, have the looking out for myself mindset, and will be very, individual and independent. Then the next generation or a few generations down will realize, no, there's something beneficial in working together and looking out for one another. And so I really think it's a cycle. I don't know if there's certain things about my generation specifically that thinks that way, or younger generations, or if it's just a part of the cycle. I don't know. I think that's how life works a lot of times. It's just a cycle.
Yeah, I think maybe at the end of the day, we all kind of just care ultimately about, our basic needs and the basic needs of our immediate family right around us. I think that that's a very human thing to do, but
there's also something positive though about being independent and looking out for yourself too. I think that's why this part of the cycle comes back, is because I feel like our time right now is kind of in a weird stage, because just thinking of our government, I just keep thinking that soon people are just going to think, I'm going to step back and mind my own business and just do what makes me happy. But then also, I think right now everyone is looking out for themselves and not aware of what other people need. And so, I think there's something beneficial also, though, to being individual and independent, is you're not harming other people by being independent. You're just looking out for yourself.
How do you, for yourself, challenge that kind of independent, looking out for myself mindset? that so many of us, I think, experience often.
Yeah, I'd be the first to admit that I have that mentality. It's pretty easy to only look at what you need and what will help you out in the end. But I think just creating connections and bonds with other people and friendships, just forcing yourself to go out and meet people that you wouldn't normally meet, hearing what they want and what they need certainly helps with that individual mindset. I think it's easier to understand where other people are coming from once you make those connections. So yeah, I would say the biggest way to combat that individual mindset, which I struggle with anyways, is just going out and meeting people who are different than you and would have different ideas and needs and wants than you. And that helps me anyways, not think so individual, even though I always go back to that.
Yeah, I know one thing that helps me is I have to really try to step into other people's shoes at times like that to really understand or try to feel what they might be feeling. And it's hard, because it's easy to have compassion and say, oh, I feel bad for that person because that horrible thing happened to them. It's another thing if it happens to us, right? So then, and I think empathy sometimes allows us to sort of feel a little bit more of what somebody else might be feeling.
Yeah, as you were talking, it brought to mind a reading that I was doing for class too, that talks about, like, I'm probably going to totally butcher this reading. So in the event my professor is listening, sorry, so it goes. But it's talking about being in relationship with each other, building those friendships, having compassion and empathy for one another, really taking the time to get to know one another opens the door for, I think, what's called divine invitation, and actually helps bring us closer to God as well. And so, yeah, this whole reading was just about all these ways of being in relationship in the church with God, with Christ, and then what that looks like in practice. And one of those ways was being in relationship with each other, because how can we be in relationship with God if we don't know how to be in relationship with God's creation as people as well? So I think that's a great start to it. And I know it's challenging. I struggle with it. I love making connections and being in community with others, but like anybody else, I also really enjoy looking out for myself, and it's a lot more convenient, right? The only person I have to disappoint is me. So don't have to worry about what others think in that case. But yeah, it can be hard.
Do you think that the church does a good job of, I guess, creating opportunities for community, for connection, for relationships, or is that something we need to do better?
I think that the church could do better with that. Honestly, thinking of my own experience, and yeah, I'm connected with a lot of people and know a lot of people, but how many people do I really have a close connection with in our church? That number's few. I'm not sure exactly how the church would make those connections, but yeah, I think the church could definitely do better having people connect with each other.
If you could attempt to answer how the church might do that in this moment, what would that look like? Just putting you on the spot.
I'll try to answer this the best I can. I've brought this up. I was on a meeting to re-envision what the circuits would look like in our conference. And whenever I think about the church being re-envisioned, anything with the church really, I always think of uniting with other churches for shared resources, and not just financial or whatever resources. But the example that always comes to mind for me is in growing up in smaller towns, I know that kids always want to go on mission trips, but it's hard to go on a mission trip when there's only to kids who are going to end up going. And so I would say, I always think of partnering with other United Methodist churches to get a larger mission trip, more kids to go on a mission trip. That's always the example that comes to mind. And so I think creating those connections comes from creating more of a United Methodist church with local churches and having people, members of the church, work together to accomplish the goals of their church. And I think that would really create connections between members. That's just the example that always comes to mind when I think of questions around what the church could do.
I love that you use that example of mission trip. And we've got something cooking for the next summer involving a conference-wide mission trip. So I will have to connect with you off screen sometime, and we'll have to talk more about that.
I also think churches coming together to share resources, and like you said, not just financial, but what does that look like? Like, to me, it just makes sense. I remember when the conference merged, and I know that was hard. I know there were a lot of strong feelings, I'm sure, on both sides of the legacy conferences, both Rocky Mountain and Yellowstone. And I was in Yellowstone, so I got to hear all about the feelings about that from our perspective. But I remember thinking to myself, like, I don't see a negative factor. Like, a larger conference just means more resources at the end of the day, right? And maybe that's naive of me to say, and I know that it's still hard geographically. Like, we're so diverse, just as far as like rural churches go, and then larger urban and more city like churches as well. But we're all at the end of the day after the same mission, right? Like, make disciples of Jesus Christ for the world, or whatever our United Methodist mission statement is, and to live into beloved community. And I don't think we can do that unless we're actually in community with each other. Well, I think we're about getting toward the end of our conversation and wrapping things up here. And Isaac, we always tend to ask our interviewees at the end of our conversation, what biblical story or piece of scripture do you draw inspiration from, if any, and why?
Yeah, I was preparing for this question. I wouldn't say that there's a specific story or verse that inspires me to do the work and ministry that I'm doing. I would say that the biggest thing I look to is just God's teaching of loving one another. I think keeping that always in mind, realizing that we're all children of God, and looking out for each other and realizing that everyone's human and loved. And I would say that's probably my biggest inspiration in life as well as ministry.
And what are some of your ambitions, short-term and long-term, when we're looking forward to, graduation and in the next year or so?
Yeah, this summer. So I've worked at a real estate agency for the past few years. So I'm going to try and get my license this summer when I turn 18. That's my big goal right now. Past that, I don't know. I think I'll always stay active in the church, find other things to stay active in the community. But yeah, I'm not too sure exactly what the rest of my life looks like.
That's exciting. Yeah.
If anyone's listening, whenever you turn 18, Isaac, and if that happens for you, I hope it does. Anyone's listening, and if you're looking for a house, go find Isaac. He'll hook you up. So, yeah. We'll drive business your direction through the podcast.
Yeah. Yes.
Well, thank you for your wisdom. Definitely an inspiration to me. So thank you for being willing to serve in so many leadership capacities.
It was great to meet you, Isaac, and have you on the show. And likewise, I'm grateful for your voice here at the conference and in the jurisdiction, and excited to see where the world takes you. So thanks again.
Thank you. And I'm excited to hear more youth voices in the coming years coming up.
That is the hope. Well, thanks, folks. Once again, I'm Court Von Lindern.
And I'm Amanda Daniel.
And this is Mountain Sky Prophets. And this episode is actually wrapping up season 1 of the podcast. Our next episode coming out after this will just be a reflection between myself and Amanda. And we're looking ahead to season 2. Going to do some great things. So stay tuned, keep listening, and engage with your young people. They are the church now. Thanks for listening to the Mountain Sky Prophets. Mountain Sky Prophets is brought to you by Young People's Ministries and Next Gen and Inclusiveness Ministries of the Mountain Sky Conference of the United Methodist Church. You can find us at www.mtnskyumc.org. Be sure to like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and make sure you tell your friends to listen in too.